Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My daughter was 5 when she first got into the pool. She was terrified of putting her face in the water. A friend recommended Helen's program at the local city pool, and I figured it was worth a shot. By the end of that first summer, my daughter was jumping off the diving board without hesitation. I was sold. Helen ran the whole thing herself. She had access to the pool before it opened to the public, handled all the paperwork, and kept parents in the loop through a private Facebook group she created. It was organized, affordable, and my daughter genuinely loved it. So every summer since then, I signed us back up without thinking twice. I trusted Helen completely. This year felt the same as any other at first. We filled out the paperwork in the spring, paid the fees, and I started mentally planning our summer schedule around the lessons. My daughter was already talking about which swimming skills she wanted to work on. Then 2 days before the second session was supposed to begin, Helen posted in the Facebook group. She announced that the entire second session was canceled, that she was retiring and wouldn't be offering any more classes, and that no refunds would be given. She closed it out by thanking everyone for their understanding. I read it 3 times, then I read it again. No explanation, no apology, just gone, and taking our money with her. The comment section exploded almost immediately. I asked her directly what was going on, pointing out that we had already paid and that she couldn't just cancel everything with no explanation and no refunds. Another parent chimed in saying it was absolutely ridiculous and that they had planned their entire summer around the lessons. Helen responded by pointing to the paperwork we had all signed at the start of the year, the part that said no refunds would be given and said it was non-negotiable. I pushed back and told her that clause had nothing to do with this situation. We weren't asking for a refund because we changed our minds. She was the one canceling the classes entirely, and that was completely different. She never responded after that. She just disappeared, leaving the rest of us staring at our screens. I called the city pool directly, hoping they could tell me something. The staff member I spoke with said I wasn't the first parent to call about it that day, and that they had been trying to reach Helen themselves without any luck. When I asked if they had any information at all, they said they genuinely didn't. They told me they just knew she had stopped showing up, and since she ran the program independently, there wasn't much they could do on their end. They suggested I look into legal options. Legal options over swim lessons. I couldn't believe I was even having this conversation, but I also wasn't about to just swallow the loss and move on. I created a new Facebook group and started adding every parent I could remember from Helen's classes. I explained why I made the group and asked if anyone had managed to reach Helen. One parent said she had completely ghosted all of them. Another said they had tried voicemails, emails, and Facebook messages and gotten total silence in return. A third said she couldn't just take everyone's money and vanish, that it wasn't how things worked. I agreed and told them I was looking into filing a complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's office and asked if anyone had held on to their paperwork or old messages from Helen. One parent mentioned their cousin was a lawyer, not practicing in Ohio, but offered to ask for some general advice. I told them that would be really helpful. We spent the next few days pooling everything we had. Some parents had old emails from Helen that included her home address. Others had screenshots of conversations where she had made specific promises about the program. I dug out the original paperwork and typed out the exact wording of the refund clause she kept hiding behind. It said that refunds would not be issued except for medical reasons like sickness or severe injury, and told parents not to ask. Even reading it back, I knew it couldn't hold up. You cannot take someone's money, refuse to provide the service they paid for, and then point to a piece of paper as your excuse. That's not a refund policy. That's theft with extra steps. I filed the complaint with the Attorney General's office and included everything. After that, I posted about the whole situation on Reddit, partly to vent and partly hoping someone had dealt with something similar. The response was more than I expected. One comment stood out. Someone explained that the city pool couldn't do much, but that the no refund clause wasn't really relevant here, since this wasn't a traditional refund situation. They said everyone could take Helen to small claims court because you cannot offer a service, collect payment, refuse to deliver, and keep the money. I brought that back to the parent group and we started talking about how to actually go through with it, but before we could get much further, I decided to share the Reddit post directly into Helen's original Facebook group. I wanted her to know we weren't quietly going away. Within hours, Helen reappeared. She posted saying she understood there had been frustration over the cancellations and that she was willing to send checks to anyone who confirmed their address by messaging her privately. I responded asking her to confirm whether these would be full refunds for the cancelled session. She said yes, full refunds would be issued, but then added that she was removing me from the group for causing unnecessary drama and that my check would be sent to the address on file. I laughed out loud when I read that. Drama. We were the ones causing drama, and her attempt to remove me was completely ineffective, by the way. She clearly had no idea how to actually ban someone from a Facebook group. Over the following days, parents started confirming in our group that their checks had arrived. 1 week passed for me, then 2. Nothing. I checked in with the group and asked if everyone had gotten their refunds at that point. 2 parents said they had received theirs the week before. A third said they were still waiting but that Helen had messaged them saying it was on the way. I told them I hadn't received anything and that Helen wasn't responding to me at all, and said I was starting to think she was singling me out. One parent said that wasn't right and asked what I was going to do. I told them I was filing in small claims court and that I had every screenshot, every post, the original paperwork, and records of every single attempt I had made to contact her. I said she could try to ignore a court summons if she wanted. I filed the lawsuit 2 days later, and 2 days after that, a check appeared in my mailbox. Full refund. Not a word from Helen, no message, no acknowledgement, just a check quietly dropped in the mail the moment she realized the judge was going to be involved. I posted in the parent group to let everyone know and said they wouldn't believe it, but Helen had sent my refund. One parent asked if I was serious and whether I thought she had found out about the lawsuit. I said the timing spoke for itself. Another asked if I was still going through with the court filing. I thought about it. I had what I needed. But walking away without a word felt like letting her off too easily. So I dropped the case, cashed the check, and then spent an evening writing honest, detailed, factual reviews of Helen's program on every platform I could find. Yelp, Google, Facebook. I kept every word professional and stuck strictly to what happened. But I made sure any parent considering signing their child up for her classes in the future would have the full picture before handing over a single dollar. My daughter is in swim lessons again this summer with a new instructor. She's already working on her backstroke and loving every minute of it. Helen, wherever she is, probably thinks she got away clean. But her name is sitting out there on the internet now, attached to exactly the kind of story that follows a person around. I had been renting apartments for years, saving every spare dollar I could while watching renovation shows on weekends. When a fixer-upper 2 streets over from my old neighborhood went on the market at a price I could actually afford, I jumped on it. The place needed work, a lot of it. New flooring, patched drywall, updated plumbing in the bathroom, a kitchen that hadn't been touched since the 90s. But it was mine, and I was willing to put in the effort to make it livable. The problem was the cost. Between the down payment and closing fees, my savings had taken a serious hit. Hiring a full crew of contractors for everything wasn't realistic, at least not right away. So when my brother offered to help with the renovations in exchange for meals and materials, it felt like the universe throwing me a rope. He had done construction work on and off for years and genuinely knew what he was doing. I figured it was a win for both of us. He'd get home-cooked food every day and all the supplies he needed, and I'd get skilled labor without draining what little money I had left. We shook on it, kept things simple, and got started. The first couple of weeks were actually great. I cooked every morning before he arrived, made sure there was lunch ready, and put together a proper dinner before he left. He seemed happy. The work was moving along. I was starting to picture what the finished house would look like. Then the complaints started. He told me the meals weren't filling enough and that he needed more protein. I apologized and promised to do better. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I started loading up the dishes with beans, lentils, eggs, whatever I could do without blowing my grocery budget. I thought that would settle things. It didn't. He started telling me he was feeling lightheaded by the end of each day and that the work was really taking it out of him. I told him I was doing my best and asked if there was anything specific he wanted me to add. He just said to make everything heavier and to add more protein. I was frustrated, but I kept telling myself he was working hard and I should cut him some slack. I pushed the irritation down and kept cooking. Then one afternoon, he fainted. Just went down while he was in the middle of cutting drywall. I panicked, got him water, made him sit, checked him over. Once I was sure he was okay, I felt the relief of someone who'd just watched a near disaster pass. That relief didn't last long. He told me he needed meat in his meals going forward, or he was done with the renovation. I was caught off guard and reminded him that I'd been trying my best to work around his needs. He said it wasn't enough and then told me he was anemic and needed meat in almost every meal he ate. He made it clear that if I didn't start cooking meat-based meals, he was walking off the job. I told him that was extreme and that adding meat to every single meal would seriously eat into my budget. He shrugged it off and said that wasn't his problem, and that I should be grateful he was even there remodeling my house. I stared at him for a second, trying to figure out if he was being serious. I reminded him that he'd offered to help in exchange for food and materials, and that I had been holding up my end of that deal the entire time. He told me the deal had changed, and that it was either meat in the meals or he was out. I asked if he could just bring his own food given how specific his dietary needs were. He refused flat out and said he was already doing me a huge favor by being there at all. I told him I appreciated his help, but that he was being unfair, that we had an agreement, and that I was already pouring a lot of money into the renovation as it was. He called me selfish and brought up his health issues like they were a trump card. I pushed back and told him that wasn't what this was about, and that if he had such specific dietary needs, he should have mentioned them at the very beginning before we made any agreement. He said he didn't think he'd have to spell it out for me, and that, as his sister, I should already know these things. I told him plainly that I wasn't a mind reader, and had no way of knowing the specifics of his diet. We went back and forth like that for a while, neither of us backing down. Every time I tried to find a middle ground, he shut it down completely. He told me there was no middle ground, that I either started cooking proper meals or he was gone. I asked him if he thought he was being even a little bit unreasonable. He said the word unreasonable didn't apply to him because he was the one doing all the hard physical work while I was just making food. I asked him if he had any idea how much time and money I was putting into those meals and into the materials he was using every single day. He brushed it off like I hadn't said anything at all. I talked to a few friends that evening and described the whole situation. Every single one of them was floored. One of them put it simply, he negotiated the deal, I held up my side, and now he was throwing a fit because the deal wasn't generous enough for him anymore. That helped me think clearly. I called a few contractors the next morning and got some quotes. Yes, it was going to cost more than I'd hoped, but it was a fixed cost with no surprises, no guilt trips, no moving goalposts. I sat my brother down and told him I'd been thinking things over and didn't feel like the arrangement was working anymore. He asked if I was just going to leave the house sitting half renovated. I told him no, that I was looking into hiring professionals instead. He seemed genuinely shocked and asked if I had any idea what that was going to cost me. I told him I'd already looked into it and that yes, it was expensive, but at least I'd know exactly what I was getting into with no last-minute demands or misunderstandings. He told me he couldn't believe I'd rather throw money at strangers than just cook a few decent meals for my own brother. I told him it wasn't about the meals anymore, and that it was about his attitude and his refusal to meet me halfway on anything. He told me fine, wished me luck with the renovation, and said not to come asking for his help again. He left, and I let him go. The contractors I hired were professional, efficient, and finished the kitchen and bathroom in less time than my brother had spent on just the drywall while complaining about lunch. A few weeks later, my mom called me, saying my brother had been telling the family I abandoned him and left him without food during hard physical labor. She was upset and expected me to explain myself, so I did. I walked her through the whole thing, the original deal, the meals I cooked, the adjustments I made, the fainting incident, the ultimatum, all of it. She went quiet for a long moment. She told me he had never mentioned any of that to her. I told her no, I didn't think he would have. She called him back. I don't know exactly what was said, but he texted me 2 days later with a very short, very stiff apology that read more like a legal disclaimer than anything genuine. I didn't respond. The house is coming along beautifully. It's costing more than I planned, but every nail in the wall was put there by someone who showed up, did their job, and didn't demand I restructure my grocery budget to keep them happy. After my second kid started school, my husband and I decided it made more sense for me to take on remote work so I could manage the house while still bringing in income. We just moved into a new place around that time too. It was a quiet neighborhood, decent-sized yard, nice garden that I've been working on since we unpacked. I spent a lot of weekends on that garden, planted flowers along the driveway, kept the hedges trimmed, made it look like something out of a magazine. I was proud of it. So one afternoon I'm sitting at my desk deep in a spreadsheet when my phone buzzes with a notification from our security system. I almost ignored it, figured it was probably just a delivery. But something made me check. I opened the camera feed and just stared at the screen. There were 3 people in our driveway. A woman, a teenage girl, and a man with a professional camera. They were posing, like actively posing for portraits, in our driveway, in front of my garden. I called my husband over from the living room, telling him to come look at something. He walked over, squinted at the screen, and his face went through about 5 different expressions in 3 seconds. He asked what in the world was going on. I told him I had no idea. He asked if they were seriously taking pictures out there. I told him it looked like senior portraits. He couldn't believe they were doing it on our property. He grabbed his shoes and we both headed outside. The woman barely looked at us when we walked up. The photographer kept shooting. The girl was mid-pose, hand on her hip, like we weren't even there. I told them clearly that this was private property and that they were trespassing. The woman, and I'm going to call her Karen because she earned that title within about 4 seconds of opening her mouth, turned to look at me like I'd just interrupted something important. She told me they wouldn't be long, just like that. Not an apology, not an explanation. Just a casual assurance that they wouldn't be long, like she was a guest who'd overstayed by 5 minutes instead of someone standing in my driveway without permission. My husband tried next, telling her they couldn't be here and that this was our home. The daughter rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might pull something and told her mom to hurry up. The photographer shrugged and kept snapping. My husband and I looked at each other. We went back inside. My husband said he was calling the police because this was beyond ridiculous. I told him to go ahead. While he was on the phone, I walked past the hallway closet and stopped. We'd had our son's birthday party the week before and hadn't fully cleaned up yet. Sitting against the wall was a giant inflatable dinosaur. A Tyrannosaurus Rex, to be specific. About 5 feet tall, bright green, completely ridiculous. I picked it up and walked back outside. Karen and the photographer were mid-session, adjusting the daughter's hair. I walked straight into the background, stood behind the daughter, and started dancing with the inflatable dinosaur, just swaying back and forth, holding it up like a dance partner. The photographer lowered his camera and asked what exactly I was doing. I told him I was enjoying my property. Karen spun around and demanded to know what was wrong with me. I turned the question right back around at her and reminded her that she was on my property without permission. She told me I was ruining the photos. I suggested that if she didn't want ruined photos, she should probably take them somewhere she was actually allowed to be. The daughter looked like she wanted to sink into the ground and begged her mom to just leave. Karen refused without hesitation. She pointed at me and told me I needed to stop what I was doing. I reminded her while continuing to dance that this was my house, and I would do whatever I liked in it. The photographer tried a softer approach, promising me they were almost done. I told him there was no rush and that I had all day. My husband came back outside still on the phone and told me the police were on their way. He saw me with a dinosaur and gave me a slow, approving nod. He told me it was a nice touch. I thanked him. Karen had reached her limit. She grabbed her daughter's arm and started walking toward the car, throwing a warning over her shoulder that this wasn't over and that they'd be back to finish, and that I better stay inside next time. I called after her that I couldn't wait and that the dinosaur and I would be ready. They drove off. My husband and I stood in the driveway and laughed until we couldn't breathe. 3 days later, I was back at my desk when I heard voices outside. I looked out the window and felt my jaw drop. They were back. Karen, the daughter, the photographer, all sitting up like the last time never happened. I called my husband at work and told him in disbelief that they had actually come back. He asked if I was serious. I told him I was absolutely serious. He said he was leaving work right then. I went outside. Karen saw me coming and straightened up like she was ready for a fight. She told me they were there to finish the shoot. I reminded her that she was trespassing again. She told me they had paid for the photos as if that somehow made it my problem. I told her it wasn't. She called me completely selfish. I asked her if she was really calling me selfish about my own property. The daughter was staring at the ground and quietly suggested they could find somewhere else to do this. Karen shut that down immediately, saying the garden was the perfect backdrop and that they were not leaving. I looked at her for a long moment. I told her okay and went back inside. I was done being polite. I went to the back door and crouched down. Our dog came trotting over immediately, tail going like a propeller. He's a big Labrador, friendly as they come, but he's also a trained service dog with a very specific skill set. One of the tricks I'd spent months teaching him was to pee on command. It started as a practical thing for travel and situations where we needed him to go on cue. But standing there in my kitchen, looking out at the woman who had come back to my property for the second time in a week, I decided it was going to serve a different purpose today. I grabbed the garden hose from the side of the house on my way out. Karen saw me and her expression hardened. She told me with a groan that this was starting again. I gave her one last chance to leave. She told me they were not going anywhere. I told her to suit herself and unclip the leash. I sent him over to say hello. He took off across the yard at full speed, barking and circling the group like he was herding sheep. The daughter screamed. The photographer grabbed his camera off the ground and held it over his head. Karen was spinning in circles, trying to keep him in view. She demanded I get my dog away from them. I called back that he was friendly and just wanted to play. He ran a few more laps, then I called him back and told him to sit. He sat perfectly, right next to Karen. She looked down at him, then back up at me, and I could see the exact moment she thought the worst was over. I praised him and told him he was a good boy. Then I paused and gave the command to pee. Karen's face changed the instant she realized what was happening. He lifted his leg. She looked down at her shoes and back up at me and asked whether my dog had just done that on command. I told her yep and turned the hose on full blast. The water hit all three of them before they could react. The daughter shrieked. The photographer spun around trying to shield the camera. Karen stood there absolutely drenched, sputtering, her hair plastered to her face. She screamed at me that I was out of my mind and demanded I stop immediately. I told her I was just watering my lawn. She called me insane. I pointed out that she was trespassing and that, funny enough, that kept being the actual issue here. My husband's car pulled into the driveway. He got out, took one look at the scene, and put his hand over his mouth. He said it looked like I had things handled. I told him I was just doing some yard work. The daughter had completely checked out. She was wringing water out of her sleeve and told her mom, in a voice that left no room for argument, that they were leaving right now. Karen opened her mouth. Her daughter said now, and meant it. For the first time, Karen had nothing to say. They packed up their soaked equipment and walked to the car. When they pulled out, Karen rolled down the window and shouted that we'd be hearing from their lawyer. I called back that she should make sure to include the dog trick in the story because it was a great one. My husband walked over and we watched the car disappear around the corner. He told me I was his hero. I told him our dog was the real hero. He got extra treats that night, deserved every single one. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.